Hello, this is Krystal, and thank you for joining me for this week's First Chapter Friday. Today I will be reading from the beginning of The Adventure of the Peculiar Protocols, adapted from the journals of John H. Watson, MD, by Nicholas Meyer. A word of explanation. For a good portion of my adult life, I have been involved with and found myself editing missing, unknown, or unearthed manuscripts alleged to have been authored by Sherlock Holmes' amanuensis, amanu, amanuensis, mm, amanuensis, amanuensis, John H. Watson, MD. It had been years since I'd given any thought to the subject when an item in the New York Times last September caught my eye. An auction had taken place at Sotheby's in London, at which a diary or journal, the catalogue used both terms, supposedly written by Watson, had been purchased for a princely £45 million sterling by an anonymous buyer via phone. I had no idea what to make of this. Did Watson keep a diary? On first blush, as we've no mention of it, this appears unlikely. On the other hand, Watson refers constantly to his copious notes, on which his case accounts are based, which may amount to more or less the same thing. I suspect, by whatever name, Watson was a compulsive chronicler, somewhat in the manner of Pepys or Anais Nin. He wrote down everything, if only for the sake of writing it down. Regardless, I did not expect the anonymous diary purchaser to reveal himself, or herself, anytime soon, nor did they. But last December, I was contacted by Greg Prickman, head of special collections at the University of Iowa Libraries, where my papers are kept. Greg, who has since become librarian of the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C., astonished me by saying that the diary in question had been loaned by its purchaser to the university for the period of 1 year. Why in the world would he have done such a thing? I asked Greg on the phone. For sure there's places with bigger endowments than my alma mater. Hey, this isn't rocket science, the librarian responded. Can't you guess? The first response that came into my head was Holmes' dictum. I never guess. It is an appalling habit, destructive to the logical faculty. But in truth, not being Holmes, I guess all the time. I'm also a sucker for magic acts and can never correctly figure the solution to any mystery stories. Well, I can, Greg offered from Iowa City. The donor, and don't ask who because I'm not allowed to tell, clearly is aware of your editorial functions on previous Watsononia. He knows your papers are held here and is hoping the journal is catnip you'd be tempted to look at and possibly work on. But he doesn't want to shell out any more dough. Heck, maybe the purchase bankrupted him. Sure. Once he'd connected the dots, I suspected Greg was right. I was in the middle of working on Star Trek Discovery, but after the show was up and running, I flew to Iowa City, or rather Cedar Rapids, where Greg met me at the airport. What do you think? I asked him, wasting no time. Fool's gold or the real McCoy? You're the expert, he said, climbing behind the wheel of his Jeep Cherokee. But you must have formed an opinion. Yes, I must. This was all I could get out of him. We checked me into the newish Hilton Garden Inn on Burlington, but only long enough to park my bag. Then it was off to the library, where Greg dialed open the big walk-in temperature-controlled vault reserved for precious manuscripts. Within was a metal desk and an uncomfortable folding chair. What Greg showed me was an old-date book of sorts, whose brittle red leather binding had almost entirely fragmented. Inside were yellowing line pages in what looked to me like Watson's familiar hand. It was some kind of diary, though very hard to make out in places. Truth to tell, the thing was falling apart, and a bunch of pages were altogether AWOL. Some looked like they had been torn out. Greg told me that the document had lain in an airless safety deposit box in a UK bank that had gone under or been swallowed up by a larger bank. He thought Lloyd's, but couldn't recall. Wherever it was stashed had no humidifier before it went under the hammer at Sotheby's and was snapped up by, who knows, someone with a lot of kale. Greg, evidently, but he wasn't talking. Fishy, fishy, fishy. The world of art and artifacts, as we all know, is cluttered with fakes. And if you would like to know what happens next, you can check this title out on the Libby app. Please join me here as I read from the beginning of Saul Bellows, The Adventures of Augie March next week. Thank you and have a great week.